What's up, everybody? In today's video, we're going to be reviewing the book "Stillness is the Key" by Ryan Holiday. The reason I read this book when I did is because I got a request from a viewer in the comments on my YouTube channel. So make sure to let me know if you want me to read a book. It took me a while to get to this just because I had some other books in the queue, but I did end up reading it as a reader requested, and I probably would have read it anyway just because I'm somewhat of a fan of Ryan Holiday. I've read Ego is the Enemy and The Obstacle is the Way. I've also read the conspiracy book he had on Hulk Hogan and Peter Thiel. That book was really awesome. And then I started a couple other books, but I didn't finish some of the other ones. And another thing is Ryan Holiday lives in Austin, and I live in Austin. And I saw him at a Starbucks once, and then I was like, hey, what's up? I felt like I was the only one that recognized him. Could be just because everybody else was leaving him alone, but I recognized him, and then I was like, what's up, and shook his hand and stuff. So that was pretty cool. So I knew who Ryan Holiday is. A lot of people, if you read self-help, you know who he is because he's very involved in the self-help world. Tim Ferriss talks about him a lot, so that's one way a lot of people know him. He's also into stoicism a lot, and this book is supposed to be kind of the third book in his stoicism series, which is Ego is the Enemy and Obstacle is the Way. And when I first heard about this book and saw it on Amazon, I thought it was going to be something different than it was because the title is called Stillness is the Key. So I thought it was going to be something more similar to Digital Minimalism by Cal Newport, and just kind of like a book like that because of all the things that we have going on in our lives, from having phones to social media to all the news stuff that's happening in the world, like where it's just constant news, and how these social media companies and these news companies are focusing more and more on fear and those emotions rather than just news that's actually news. And so I thought it was going to be Ryan Holiday providing tips on how to gain solitude and why solitude is so important. But that's not actually what this book is about. This book is about, I would categorize this book more as like just general self-help. And that's who I would recommend it to, maybe people on their self-help journey. And I would recommend it to, like, if you haven't read Ryan Holiday, maybe read this book first, because this just has a bunch of general tips. It isn't like too focused on stoicism or anything like that. It's more just general self-help. And the way it's structured, and how you'll see what I'm saying by the way when I describe the way it's structured in 3 parts: mind, body, and soul. And so it's a little bit confusing about how stillness factors into that, because it's like mind, body, and soul. Like, what does that do? What does that have to do with stillness? And I went back and read the introduction, because even after I finished the book, I still was confused about what stillness had to do with this. And he was talking about, like, you can create your own stillness through like doing all these things that he recommends. And so he has these 3 categories: mind, body, and soul. And then within those categories, he has what I call like action items or tips. And by my count, he has 28 tips in there that you can do to cultivate stillness. To me, it's a little bit confusing because some of them are like actual, like, find stillness. There's ones like seek solitude, things like slowing down and emptying the mind. To me, that's like stillness itself. So it's like he's saying to find stillness, like find stillness. So I feel like a lot of these tips aren't really useful, or just kind of generic self-help. So it's confusing about why it's called Stillness is the Key. But he structures the book like him and Robert Greene often do. Robert Greene is his mentor, and they both kind of like look at history and they pick stories out of there. Like, he has a lot of stories in here about JFK, Abraham Lincoln, Winston Churchill. So they use those stories to tell the point that they're trying to get through. So in that sense, it's typical. But I can't really provide a summary other than that, because there's, like I said, there's just a bunch of tips and a bunch of action items. But I will go through some of the tips that I think would be the most useful. And so, like, you don't have to read the whole book, and is summarized up without like giving away the whole book. And these are in no particular order, so I'll talk about each a little bit. The first one that I thought was really good is in the body section, and that's get a good night's sleep. If you're going to cultivate stillness or just have a good self-help experience, getting a good night's sleep is really key, especially with all the information that's coming out about it, because you're going to have a lot of anxiety. You're going to have a lot of just mental issues if you don't get enough sleep, and you could have psychological disorders if you don't get enough sleep. So that I felt like was a good tip, and that was in the body section. The next tip that I think is really good is keeping a journal, and that was in the body section. And he basically talks about how the best performers in the world keep a journal. And I also talked about this a little bit in Late Bloomers. You know, a journal is where you can work on narrative psychology, work on your life story, tracking your progress. So that I feel like is a really good tip, and you can cultivate stillness, psychological stillness with that. A next tip that I thought was really unique and isn't discussed by many people in the self-help world is healing your inner child. Now, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of books on inner children and healing your inner child. There's even support groups for that, adult children of alcoholics, and talking about healing your inner child. But not many people, especially as popular as Ryan Holiday, talk about that. And I do think it's really important. And he discusses that, where it's like we're all products of our childhood and our parents. And if you're constantly trying to live up to your parents' expectations or unreasonable expectations, then you're going to be constantly burning yourself out, or you'll be destructive, or you're trying to get attention because your parents didn't give it to you. So it's good to work on that and heal your inner child, because you have to realize you're not going to get what your parents didn't give you by just working really hard in your adulthood. There's going to be certain things you can't get, and you just have to work on that, and then you have to move forward to become a more complete person and fulfilled person. And a good way to heal your inner child, which is the next tip I'll talk about, is by getting a higher power. And he talks about that in the soul area of the book. And that's another thing that self-help people don't really talk about, is spirituality. And he really delves deep into that and how important that is to be successful. And I believe that strongly as well. For example, if you have a bad childhood, you might have this emptiness inside of you, or just in society today with being constantly watching TV or social media. Like on Late Bloomers, they said that we consume media 11 hours a day. Doing that, you might not be totally focused on what's right for you, and you might be looking towards the media to fulfill your needs. And gaining a higher power will stabilize you. It takes you out of yourself. It diminishes your ego. And so that was another great tip that I liked from the book. Another great tip that I liked from the book was walking. And this was in the body part. And he just talks about like walking and getting out and walking. And I've been thinking about this a lot recently too, just for myself. Because if you know anything about like NLP, which is neuro-linguistic programming, you know that the body kind of leads the mind. So if you feel like you're not making progress in your life, and you're like inside in your bed all day, then it's not really going to improve. But walking makes your brain think like, oh, we're making progress. So it's a good way to get out of your own head. And he also gives examples about like people that walked a lot, and like that's where they got a lot of their best ideas, and some of the greatest thinkers used to walk a lot. So that's another great tip that I like about this book. And another great tip that he has in the body section is build a routine. You know, building a routine will kind of like stabilize yourself, versus constantly having to tell yourself what to do every day, or just doing nothing and then, you know, never know what you're going to do. Your mind's constantly working to figure out what the next thing to do is. Or if you have a stabilized routine, you can work within the routine and be more successful. And just, I believe that building a routine stabilizes the mind, because it's doing what it knows every day, and it has expectations, and it's not constantly having to be aware and anxious of what's coming next. So I really like that tip. And I would take it even further and say build a fitness routine, because a fitness routine will get you out of your head, and it gives you something to push against. And he talks about that as well, push against, so that you can release your energy and feel like you're making progress. And the last tip that I wanted to highlight from the book is limiting your inputs. And I've been noticing this a lot in my life as well. If you want stillness, or you want stability, or you want calmness in the mind, you should limit your inputs. And this just means from anything. from TV, video games, your phone, social media, even people you interact with every day. You need to limit your inputs because all those things are going to swirl around in your mind. So if you have negative things that you watch, like the news or maybe the stock market went down, and you expect your mind not to be working on that in the subconscious, then like you're wrong. If you see negative things, if you hear negative things, if people are just cussing and saying negative things around you all day, and you think that's not going to affect you, then you're wrong. And the more we limit things in our lives that are negative, the better off you're going to be. And I agree with that wholeheartedly, especially if you're trying to work on something, like limiting your inputs and focusing on that thing is the best, because your mind's going to be just hyper focused on one thing and getting better at it. So if you limit your input and limit the amount of problems your brain has to solve, you're going to be better off. And I like the way he puts it in the book. So that was another great tip from Stillness is the Key. So that's my brief summary and recommendation of Stillness is the Key. Overall, I think the book is okay as a self-help book. You can get a lot of this stuff in blogs and things like that. So I don't know how necessary this is to read for people, but if you want an introduction to Ryan Holiday, this is a good way to get introduced. If you want to see my other book recommendations and reviews, make sure to subscribe to this channel and like this video. Thanks for watching.